Welcome to Power Lunch Live. I'm Rhett Power, your host. It's good to be with you here today. Where I am, it's a bright and sunny day, so that makes me happy. The point of Power Lunch Live is to have today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, people who are doing amazing work in the world that we can learn from, that help us get better at what we do. That is the whole point of the show. The fun part about that is that the show can be interactive, and that only happens if you participate. We are on Facebook. We're live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, of course, LinkedIn Live, and we monitor those feeds during the program. Please ask your questions if you have them. That really does help us get to the key things that you want to learn. I've got a great conversation today. It's going to be a lot of fun. Vanessa Wakeman, she's CEO of the Wakeman Agency. Now, Vanessa is a champion for nonprofits and progressive organizations, and her deep knowledge of the politics of social change has made her a trusted advisor to organizations around the country. As a futurist, Vanessa helps organizations evaluate the past and the present and to develop strategies and study trends to shape a desired future. Even more important today as we're going through all of these changes economically, socially, politically. If you're an entrepreneur or you're running an organization, you've got that in the back of your mind. Things are changing rapidly. How do I keep up with it? How do we evolve? So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, because I think that's a key thing that a lot of businesses and people are thinking about. Now, she's been recognized as one of the 50 game changers of PR by PR News and a champion of PR by PRWeek. She's recently been named to the City and State New York's 2020 The Power of Diversity Black 100 list, highlighting influential Black leaders in New York City, and numerous other awards. We could talk about those. But Vanessa, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here today.
Well, we were talking before we came on about this being just a weird time. So talk about, is 2020 and the pandemic and the social justice issues that we've been facing and just everything that we're facing, has that changed you, changed your thoughts on things, changed your sort of big picture life perspective? What has 2020 done to you, done to you? How are you dealing with it all?
That's a great question.
Really unfair question, so sorry.
Sure. So I think from a work perspective, what it's done for me is reminded me of the importance of the work that we've been doing. So I've had my agency for about 17 years now. We've always been in this social justice space. We've always sort of worked on social issues. And so when you look at the COVID pandemic and how that has sort of brought to light the disproportionate ways that it's impacted communities of color, which is sort of a similar trend in other social issues. It just reminded me like, yep, here's another example of like why we need to be working on equity and identifying opportunities to sort of elevate and amplify the voices of everyone. And then from the social reckoning, that sort of happened after the murder of George Floyd and some of the others, I think that also helped to remind me of like the urgency of our work. I've been for a really long time a supporter or sort of a evangelist, if you will, for innovation and disruption, right? So a lot of the social issues or the way that social change happens has sort of followed a very traditional format about like, this is the way we've done it, this is how it's always worked. And so there hasn't been a lot of innovation. And because of the way organizations typically receive funding from foundations or individual donors, there are often restrictions with that. And so that doesn't allow them to be innovative. However, the pandemic forced sort of innovation in some of the practices and the way money was funneled into organizations. So it sort of highlighted that it's possible. And so now the question is, now that we know that we can do these things, how do we sort of dismantle the structures, many of which are oppressive, and that's another conversation, but how do we dismantle those structures to allow us to sort of give money to leaders so that they can make decisions about how to support their communities? And so taking it back to your question was like, what does it it done for me? It's just reminded me that we have been on the right track. It's sort of like, leading the charge around innovation and disruption. We have been on the right track around making sure that there is, conversations happening or the elevation of these really important issues. And on a personal note, this has really reminded me of the importance of like my family and friends, and sort of having access to that and remembering that that's, at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. And so, not being able to see the people that you love, you recognize like, look at all the opportunities I squandered previously. Like when we could have gone, gotten together, but I decided to write that proposal, or I didn't go to this function because of whatever reason. And so I think it's just reminded me of the beauty and the gift of like love and people who care about me around me, and I never want to take that for granted again after having this experience.
Yeah, it has made absolutely brought that to light, right? That I've kind of resolved to never pass up another opportunity to be with friends and family. That is really the key. One of the things that I want to ask you about, and you talked about innovation a little bit, and you talked about some of the conversations that you've been sort of having for really a long time, that COVID has sort of helped give you focus on and stuff. One of the things that for me has been, I'm working on some projects, some healthcare projects right now. And one of the things that I guess I really until recently hadn't thought a lot about, and maybe didn't even just consciously think about in terms of it being a real problem, was health equity. Do you think that COVID is going to, it sort of brought that to light, that there's an inequality really in our healthcare system with minorities and with people of color, and is it going to help bring focus to that and help, are things like telemedicine going to help in terms of equally, bringing health and well-being and healthcare to communities that often don't have great healthcare?
So I think there's two answers to that question. The first part is around, bringing it to light. This is not an issue that we didn't know existed, but because it was sort of brought to a national or even a global scale, people sort of, you can't look away. It's like the car accident, that 60 car pile up on, Highway 66. Like, okay, we're all looking at it now. I think that's so as disappointing as it is that it took this long for that to happen. We're here now. So the question in front of us is, what are we going to do? I do think that there are opportunities to sort of transform the way that healthcare is brought to different communities. But I'm not sure if outside of this particular pandemic or this particular issue, if we're looking at a sort of universal approach to this. So when you look at, let's say, women, maternal health care, Black women sort of have an extremely alarming rate of, death rates while pregnant, right? And so how are we addressing those things? Or this idea of pain? Like there are countless stories and tons of research that speak to, Black women sort of, saying that they're in pain or they're hurting and doctors not believing it. There's a sort of like, oh, you're strong. This doesn't really hurt you. And so I think that there is a plan and a sort of, process and maybe some, healthcare ruling and legislation that speaks to what needs to happen. But then there's also this deeper sort of urgency around the understanding of being able to see people as, the humanity in people, and like, what does it mean to have an entire community? So there are stories of, 4 or 5 people in a family dying from COVID. And so like, how do we make sure that the people who are responsible for caring for communities sort of understand the impact and sort of act with a sense of urgency, so that and people sort of have trust in their caregivers. So there are people who say, I don't want to go to the doctor because I don't trust the doctor. Or the people say, I can't afford to go to the doctor. Or we have, from an immigration perspective, there were conversations about people are afraid to go to hospitals because they didn't know if ICE was going to be hanging out. So I think that there are all of these sort of structural measures in place that sort of allow it to be easy for us to not take care of people that are part of this country. And so I think that what happens now is going to guide like what healthcare looks like for people of color for the, the next few decades. And so I think it's important that we prioritize that. And I think we prioritize that by not sort of doing what we always do. It's like, oh, I'm the expert in the room, so this is what I think is needed. But we speak to communities and we allow them to have a seat at the table, or better yet, they already have their tables. You all, the folks who are quote unquote in charge can join those tables and begin to build trust. And so that we can create like viable solutions that keep people healthy and understand that the doctors and caregivers are there to serve them in a way that speaks to their own experiences.
What role does technology play in that, you think?
I think technology plays a huge role in that. I think telemedicine could be a huge game changer. I think the entry point for that, I'm guessing, would be much less than having a doctor in a doctor's office and sort of requiring all of that sort of infrastructure. But then I think the other side of that is when we have this issue of digital divide and know that X percentage of households don't have access to Wi-Fi or using hotspots. So are we asking families to, go sit in McDonald's to have your sort of, annual exam with your medical practitioner? Like, that's crazy. And so I think, we talk about, universal, basic right is, people shouldn't be hungry. They should have education. Should also have quality, access to quality healthcare. And if we are a digital society, then a basic need is to have a, digital presence in your home. Like, everyone should have access to the internet. We do everything through this tool.
Right. Right. No, you're absolutely right. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about your work in so PR and nonprofits, and you talk a lot about you work with a lot of nonprofits. What are the challenges they're facing right now, and what as all these rapid changes are happening, talk about what you're seeing in nonprofits and what the challenges are going to be going forward, and what is there some advice, I guess?
Sure.
I'm on the board of 4 nonprofits, and so I'd love to hear if there are things that you're seeing that we can, maybe that I can take away from your advice.
Sure. So I think the one universal challenge that I find in most organizations, no matter how healthy the organization is money, right? There continues to be added burden on nonprofits to provide services. So the old model of sort of, social issues was government sort of carried the majority of that burden. And over the years, I'm not sure where the shift happened, but it sort of went to nonprofits. And so when you have a time when unemployment rates are high, when people are facing eviction, homelessness, all of these issues, they're turning to nonprofits. They need food. They need, if they're an essential worker, they need childcare for their children. All of these things, and so they need more money. Like, it's just no other way that we need to be funneling more money into nonprofits. That's the first thing. The second thing is there's sometimes this, control game around, okay, we're going to give you this money, but you have to use it this way. And we want this report and we need this information. And let me tell you what's needed. That needs to be a system or policy that just goes away immediately. Give unrestricted money, trust that the people who are leading these organizations that know the communities that they serve, that understand who the elders or influencers are in the different communities, that they are going to do what they need to do to support whatever cause it is. And I mean, of course, there should be some just general checks and balances, right? So people aren't, having fun with the money, which I don't think anyone would be doing, but it doesn't need to be so restrictive that people aren't able to make decisions that benefit the organization, the cause. The second thing is supporting leadership. Like, I'm often surprised at how little leadership development opportunities there are in the nonprofit sector. And so how, nobody sort of is born a quote unquote manager or leader in the way that we for them to be. And so like, where's the opportunity? So there's this, sort of model of scarcity built into nonprofits. We don't want to spend money on these things. We want every dollar to go out to the cause, which, that's very noble. But the reality is it doesn't allow the kind of growth that is needed to tackle the problems that we face today. And so really helping to build in that leadership development opportunity. And then the other thing is this idea of equity. The nonprofit sector, like when you think about systemic racism, it has very much been built on a model where white people know best, and we can have Black people doing work, and even when they do a good job, or people of color doing a good job, what we're going to do is our reward to them is going to be, we're going to give you less money because you were just a magician. You've been sort of working with such little resources for so long. You don't need the big checks. Like this person, right. You don't need that. And so we need to stop that. We need to make sure that there's equity around how we distribute funds, that there is more leadership development. And also, board members, as valuable as many of them are, have more stories than I care to think about, where board members have been more of a hindrance than a help to an organization. And so you're there to sort of guide and support and champion, but don't block the entrance to the new path, right? And so I think that there needs to be some check-in for board members around, like, why am I on this board? Everyone wants to be part of something that's cool, that's new, that has a great reputation. Joining a board, there's a tremendous responsibility. And so I think people need to be realistic around what they can give. And I think for nonprofits, they need to be realistic around why you want this person on the board. And so to me, those are the three things that I see, like structurally. For when I think about opportunities, I think that we have had so much transformation just in our country, and sort of being forced to rethink the way we do everything. And so for a long time, people were like, oh, our staff can't work from home because we don't have access to the right technologies. But when it was forced to happen, people did that. And so I think thinking about, like, how can we deliver more services, maybe in different ways, to think about what would I ask organizations this all the time. What would need to happen to put your organization out of business, right? How do you really take, not those incremental steps, but those big, bold, courageous steps towards, like, we're done. This problem is solved. And so sometimes I will get the response like, oh my gosh, if that happens, I won't have a job. And so I can assure anyone who's listening that if you are able to solve whatever the problem is, you can pretty much get any job you want.
You're taken care of, believe me. If you solve a big social problem, you're good to go.
I agree. And so thinking about, like, where's the opportunity to sort of, like, solve, and then in so many other places, particularly in startup culture, right? Like, there's reward for failure. There's reward for, like, we tried something different. We need to start to build that into the conversation and the process for nonprofits, because it's a problem that hasn't been solved before. And so we should expect that there will be some failure as we're trying to do that. So instead of, like, Band-Aid solution or, like, small, safe changes, like, where do we go? How do we sort of create a ecosystem that speaks to, celebration of failure, because that means we're one step closer to solving this problem.
Yeah, I mean, wow. I've got about 50 questions that came out of that, what you just were talking about. Couple of things I want to ask you. Do you think it's time to rethink what board? Because I know a lot of the boards I'm on, it came down to being able to raise money, right? It came down to we want you on the board because you can write a check,
right?
And I've been on working boards, that were sort of startup of the organization, that kind of thing. But what's the key, you think? What's the key in the mix of board members? Like, when you're looking at a board member, are you looking at it because we need let's say we need a communications person, or we need you're looking at it from sort of strategically. I need a legal person. I need I need an accountant, so that can run a finance committee. Is that the way to look at it, or should it really be, should we rethink board structures for small organizations where maybe you have an advisory board, but then you have a board that can write those checks, but then you have a working board that helps? I mean, how can we rethink a board the way we think about boards, I guess.
Right. So first, I want to say that I am incredibly biased about this, and I feel that I make a terrible board member, but I'm very upfront with it. So when people ask me to join a board, I tell them that I am not interested in doing the work that I do all day, as my part of my volunteer service. Like, I'm happy to write a check if I can, if it's to an organization that I believe in, but sort of doing the same things like that. I also want to have an experience where I can learn things. And right. So maybe I'm part of the programs committee or, something else that is not directly associated to like, oh, we need communication support or like fundraising. That doesn't work for me. That's not everybody's experience, but that's mine. So I always make sure that I'm upfront. I think that as far as the structure, I think that a nonprofit needs all of that, right? You need the people who can write the big checks. That's the reality. And you need the people who can sort of provide that strategic counsel. What I think needs to happen is there needs to be more clarity on who's who. And so sometimes nonprofit is so excited to have scored some very, prominent person, but there was not a conversation about them writing a check or what the commitment is. And so they find themselves like really upset and frustrated that, they're a millionaire or that they're a gazillionaire and they've only given $10,000. But did you have those conversations up front? Did they sort of make a commitment to giving? Or like, they run a successful PR firm. How come then? Do they understand that that's what you're looking for? But I think, again, this sort of idea of like, we need some people, we need some bodies, we need some help. And there's some assumptions baked into that. So I think sort of going through like a really structured interview process, sort of sharing like what the expectations of how long you'd like someone to be on the board. I'm sorry, I don't want to see board members who've been on the board for 30 years at the same organization, right? Like, let's sort of, put them as, trustees or some other role, but like there needs to be new energy in an organization to help evolve as the problems evolve. And I have not seen any truly effective models of people being on the board that long and still being able to contribute in a meaningful way. There have been a few exceptions, but overwhelmingly no. And so thinking about like, how long should someone serve on the board? Like, what if you were sort of giving a review at the end of the year, what would you want to see in your board members? And then the same for the board members, like what do they, when you are agreeing to be on the board, what do you want from this experience? Some people say, oh, I believe in this cause. Sometimes they think that means that they're going to be actively involved in sort of doing the CEO's job or telling the CEO how things should be done, which is sometimes a hindrance to the progress of the organization. So I think sort of setting clear expectations on both sides is really important. I think trying to figure out like what problems the board should be solving. I think sort of presenting to your board, like these are the issues that we're grappling with and this is what we need help with outside of all the traditional governance around like, this is where we are financially, legally, et cetera. Like allow them to come together as a group to help solve something. And then there needs to be some reminder, hopefully from the board chair or some other influencer, that the job is not to get in the way of the leadership team's progress. That your job is not to sort of like, if you don't get your way, then you're sort of, stopping the entrance. Your job is not to sort of penalize a CEO for creating awareness. We have one situation where we were retained to elevate sort of the thought leadership of the CEO. And, the founder was really, really excited in the beginning, actually sort of approved the expense, and then decided that the CEO was getting too much attention and so blocked, any future things. Like, how is that helpful? And so I think that it's really important just to sort of be clear around what's needed.
Yeah. What is one of the things I'm fascinated by is I'm on a board of a new organization that I find interesting, and it's a organization. It's actually a for-profit company that's helping organizations raise money.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that, and it's with products, it's with consumer products. Do you think that nonprofits should be looking at, because money is going to be harder and harder to get. I mean, with the economic problems that we're having, I know a lot of smaller nonprofits are struggling. And should they be looking at alternative ways to raise money through products, through branding, through products and services that they can sell. Is that something that, I mean, being creative in the way that you think about raising capital and raising money, is that something you believe in, or think that that's a smart way to start thinking about sort of maintaining your, being able to maintain your work that you're doing, your good work that you're doing, but thinking about raising money in different ways?
So yes, so first I want to say, I believe there's research or data that says that most nonprofits have less than 6 months of savings, and on average it's a month or less. And so we do know that nonprofits are definitely having financial challenges, and this is pre-pandemic. So I can only imagine what it's like now. I love the idea of having multiple revenue streams. For the typical nonprofit that is struggling to maintain their main line of business, which is providing whatever service it is, and then also with the additional burdens that happen now in the pandemic, I think it's incredibly challenging to even have the space to create and think about what alternate routes you can go. Right? I'm an entrepreneur, and for me, I know that I need structured, carved out time to be able to think about my ideas and is this real, or is this just a pie in the sky thing? Okay, we're going to pilot this, or we're going to test this. We're going to do a sprint to see if this is real. That's just not the reality for the traditional nonprofit. What I would like to see, and while I'm not saying that can happen, or I wouldn't like it to happen, I just think that puts an additional burden and sort of pressure and stress on an already fragile system. And so now we're asking and it's probably going to be the same people who are doing the work, who are already overburdened, now have to do this other job. Right. And so that feels like we're asking far too much. What I would love to see, though, is more of a interdependence, if you will, between government, corporations, and nonprofits working together. So I think that corporations are really poised to be able to funnel much more money into these causes. If we saw a number of organizations talk about their social justice commitments after the murder of George Floyd. And so that was, great. Okay, everybody's sort of paying attention, couldn't look away. What are we doing? So it can't be the same scenario of, file this grant application. But you can get on the front lines and say, we know that these organizations need support. And so how can we better create a system where we're all taking some responsibility for caring for our society, for sort of making sure that people have their basic needs served and that they're able to sort of live in dignity. That's not a hard sell. That's not a hard sell. And so I think that to me allows the organizations to do their best work. So when I think about myself, when I'm worrying about something related to my business, it's a distraction from me being able to do whatever the business is at hand. And so right. I can only imagine what that feels like for nonprofit leaders. Am I going to have enough money for payroll? I can think of several nonprofits who have said staff didn't get paid today because of whatever. That's insane. That just is unacceptable to me.
Yeah, no, that's so true, and it really does come down to, that thin of line of being able to take care of your people, and you kind of answered this, you kind of went here for a minute, and I want to go there as well, and that's talking about how businesses, whether they're startups or they're growing companies, been around for a little bit. What you talked about being socially responsible and taking care of your community. How do you, as a startup? It makes sense to me. We were always involved socially in causes locally, and internationally. But talk about building that into your culture as a company, and taking on a small. I love the idea of adopting a couple of nonprofits or a nonprofit, right? And even devoting some staff time to helping them sort through some of their problems. All of these nonprofits have technology challenges. Mm-hmm. They all have finance challenges. They all have staff challenges where they're just stretched thin, right? So companies can really help these nonprofits flourish. Talk about how you can get involved and how that helps, sort of the culture of a company when you do that.
Sure. So for anyone listening that is a startup and is thinking about ways that they can help nonprofits, sort of, calling up and telling them like, hey, I have 40 volunteers to help you. Stop. Don't do that. Like that's not helpful.
Wrong approach.
Yeah. Oh, we're going to come and paint your walls. Not helpful. Like the amount of sort of preparation and planning that it takes to be able to sort of, manage those kind of opportunities is just not realistic for everyone. Like there are ways to volunteer, but rather than having the nonprofit have to meet your needs, if you really are coming to help, ask them what their needs are. And so a lot of organizations sort of have their, our policy is, our staff gives 100 hours and we'll send 25 people to sort of do this task. That may not be the most helpful thing. So start by figuring out where you can be of service. For those organizations that are just thinking about this, I think it's interesting. I was having this conversation with someone recently, and they were asking me about startups, similar question to you. And I said, when you're in startup mode, particularly if you're getting VC money, nobody is interested in hearing your social responsibility policy, and maybe now that's a little bit more acceptable, but really it's about how am I getting my money back? You know what I mean? How am I getting a return on investment? And so there's tremendous pressure on organizations to be focused on, build, scale, and ideally, the exit. Right. That doesn't really speak to having time to carve out we have a, social responsibility officer, or we're thinking about our philanthropic efforts. And so what we did a couple of years ago, we hosted some of these executive roundtables to sort of speak to startup founders, really brief conversations just to say, at what point would you be willing to start thinking about this? Like where in your journey? So we know it's not like 0 to 12. Like you just, unless you're a social impact organization or a social entrepreneur where that's baked in, that just isn't likely going to sort of bode well for you when you're sort of, doing the circuit of trying to raise money. Are there particular things you can be thinking about? Like what causes are sort of natural sort of alliances to your work? And so if you are a technology company focused on a particular area, and maybe there's some data points that sort of point you in a certain direction, maybe think about those. And I also think that it doesn't always have to be a connection to a nonprofit that is exactly in your space. Like most startups are, really brilliant sort of, process and planning and architecture things. Maybe there are other ways to help organizations outside of your general sort of peripheral that are connected. And then once you are able to give money, think about giving money. It's not always like the playground, or, there could be other ways. So look at the communities that you're in. One of the challenges, and one of my biggest complaints I have, once organizations are able to give when they are at a national level, they stop looking at local partners. Some of them, they're like, oh, it's just easier for us to look at, one national organization. It's like, but they're company or a nonprofit's right in your backyard that needs you. And so rather than taking the lazy route of like, we're going to give to the, national whatever, instead of the 10 local programs here, do a little work. Like do a little work and sort of see who's in your backyard, create those community partnerships, build the community. And so I think that's really helpful. And I also think for a startup, even if you're not able to articulate it out to like your venture capital group or your advisors or even your board, it would be great, particularly as we've all sort of seen so many different ways that, social issues are impacting us this year. Have it in like your secret, section of your business plan to talk about like who you want to be as a company, like what's built into the DNA of your organization that naturally lends itself to you being able to be a part of this sort of like universe of change and transformation. Because I think the very sort of like focus and definition of like what startups are positioned to do, how can you lend that to an organization that is doing that in a social way?
Yeah, no doubt. I talk about thought leadership a little bit. I am fascinated by, in a lot of my coaching and consulting engagements, the CEO will say, I need to be a thought leader. I need to, I need to get out there. I need to build my profile. I think that's interesting, but I'm not sure if that's always necessary. But I do think that we do need more women, people and people of color as in thought leadership. Talk about that a little bit, where, what is the state? What is the state of things really? I mean, where are we? I don't see a lot of people. I'm gonna get myself in trouble there, but I don't see a lot of people of color in places where I write. I write a lot for, some national publications. I don't see a lot on LinkedIn. I don't see a lot on these platforms of people of color that are considered thought leaders. I mean, am I on top? Am I on base there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You're absolutely on base. And so to your point about not seeing a lot, as someone, I'm going to challenge you or invite you and encourage you on your own show to say, in those places where you don't see a lot, if there's someone who comes to mind, if you know someone of color, like, their voice should be here, be in a sort of a compliment, support them and see if you can help to make that happen. Because sometimes making that introduction or saying like, I'm sort of champion and be a champion for this person can make all the difference in sort of the opportunities that are available to them. As far as the gender difference around thought leadership, there are far more thought leadership voices out in the world than women. Not to say that women don't have the insights and expertise, but the opportunities have just not been given. There's data that says that men are sort of have more access and opportunities to sort of be the, a subject matter expert on different issues for TV or radio or even, op-eds. And so there are different programs that are working to change that. For us, as someone who works primarily with the nonprofit sector, I just noticed that in our work. It was sort of like an aha moment for me. So we would work with organizations, and part of our PR planning would be around, like, we want to sort of help build the thought leadership platform for, this male leader or this female leader. And I noticed with the males, even when their insights were not as strong, they were very comfortable sort of saying that they wanted to be a thought leader and contributing whatever they could to the conversation. And, I make the joke that sometimes after the check clears, they're like, okay, we've been working together for 2 weeks, make me famous, right? Like that's sort of the mindset that they have. And then for women, there was this like very hesitant, like really brilliant women introducing new information, new topics, new approaches, radical opportunities to create change. They were very hesitant. And I was like, what's happening here? And I realized that for women, because there aren't as many opportunities, and the same goes for people of color, there's this pressure that you want to make sure you're doing it right so you don't mess it up for the person who can possibly come behind you. And so I describe this as a group of people are sitting in a room, and a man comes into the room and he turns on the light. He switched the light switch, and he says, "Look, I've given you light." The woman created the light bulb, and she's like, "No, I don't want to talk about it yet because I want to increase the lumens. It's not perfect yet," right? So two very different approaches to the contribution. And so we created a program called She Roars, which is a thought leadership development program for women. Initially, it was for only women in the nonprofit sector, because we know that more than 70% of the workforce in the nonprofits are women, but they are not sort of the majority in the leadership roles. And so how can we help to package their insights and expertise in a way that they do have a sort of more clear trajectory to those leadership roles? Or if they are in a leadership role, we saw that thought leadership helps to increase donations. And because the money game is real, we want to make sure that we have every resource available for that. This year, I made the decision to open She Roars up to women in all sectors. And the reason I did that was just thinking about all of the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that my agency is doing right now. It's like, you know what, this could be helpful to women who are in other sectors, because the problem sort of persists across all industries. And so wanting to give people sort of support around how do you identify your thought leadership? Like, what is it that you want to say? And outside of just your thinking, right? That's the easy part, to sort of be clear around like your research or your body of work. For women, there are these other roadblocks, right? So you're in a workplace and you are sometimes silenced, or, you say something and you don't get a response, and a man says the same thing and everybody's giving high fives. And so how do you deal with that? Like, are there things that you were told during your childhood that speak to, having a different opinion? Nice girls don't do that. You sort of want to be democratic and in agreement. And so thinking about all of these sort of like emotional and mental sort of developmental pivotal moments in your own sort of growth as an individual, how does that impact how you share your voice with the world? And so that program has been really an exciting addition to the agency, and sort of seeing the ways that it can help women to sort of amplify their voices on important causes.
So how talk about that a little bit more, because I want to know how people can do it. How is it for organizations? Is it for individuals? Is it online? Is it in person? Let's talk about that a little bit, because I think that's fascinating.
Sure. So right now, because of COVID, and even pre-COVID, it was primarily offered virtually. And so it's offered in 3 scenarios. The one-on-one coaching, it means that you get access to me for 3 months to sort of, go in depth with you on building your platform. And then we have 2 sort of online class scenarios. One is called the Mastermind, which is a group of women from different organizations sort of coming together to work on their thought leadership. That's a 6-week program. And during that, people walk away with sort of an identification of their platform, and then some self-regulation tools to help them. Like, what do you do when you bump up against resistance? Because that's very real in thought leadership. There's a fear of, people sort of sharing new ideas and getting rejected. And so sort of going through that. And then we have something called the solo sessions for people who want to do it at their own pace on their own. That's also available. And so we're starting our next classes for the master class. That's beginning, I believe, in February. That'll be our next class.
Okay. That's fantastic. And how can they find that?
Yes, they could find it on our website, thewakemanagency.com. And we also have, I think, a microsite that is called Thought Leadership for Women. So very easy to find. If you are listening and think you need some support, by all means, join us. Would love to have you. And very excited to have our offering be available to women in all industries now versus just the nonprofit sector. So
is that thoughtleadershipforwomen.com?
Yes, thoughtleadershipforwomen.com.
Okay, and we'll put that in the show and the link here so people can hook up for that. That's fantastic.
And maybe what we'll do is I can send you something. Maybe we can give some discount to your listeners.
Okay. I think just knowing that it's there so people can do it. Sorry, listeners, she needs to make money on it so she can keep providing this content. So. But anyway, no, that'd be great. But I just want to make sure that people at least get the information, and they can negotiate with you on the discount. But thank you for offering.
You're welcome.
So this is great. We'll put that in the show on the LinkedIn platform so that people can find it. Vanessa, this has been great. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Rhett, can I mention one other thing for 2 seconds?
Please.
The one thing I want to mention that we just started and would love to get support from anyone who is able. We just launched a campaign called Louder Than Words. And what it is it's a corporate, it's an invitation to corporations to live into their social justice commitments by providing financial support and leadership support to nonprofit organizations that are led by people of color. So we're building the first ever the nonprofit directory, leadership directory of nonprofits that are led by people of color. And then we're using that to sort of introduce corporations to those organizations. So some of the, comments previously were like, oh, we don't know, who the leaders are. And so we want to create this directory so it's an easy introduction. And we're asking corporations to consider making an investment. We're sort of moving away from the words charity toward investment in these nonprofit leaders who we know receive significant significantly less financial support than their white counterparts. And so that initiative is called Louder Than Words. Information is on our website, and would love any support we can, either to encourage nonprofit leaders of color to join the directory, or if you have any sort of decision-making power in a corporation, to please consider sort of supporting a nonprofit.
Oh, bravo. Let me make sure I get that down too, because I want to put that out there as well. What was the website on that again?
The name of it, it's on our website, thewakemanagency.com, okay. And the initiative is Louder Than Words. Louder Than Words. And there is also a separate Louder Than Words website, louderthanwords.com.
Okay. Well, we'll try to get all of that in there so people know where to find all this good stuff.
Thank you.
And good luck with that. I think that's really, really fantastic there. That's I think that's going to help a lot of people. I really see that as, and I think it's good to make sure that these companies follow up on their commitments to helping, right? It goes beyond the words that you say in a statement or a press release, right? You've got to live it. I mean, and I think that today, what you're talking about here, to me, if I work for a corporation and I see us make this statement, but we're truly not living it, I mean, today I go somewhere else. I look for something else, right? Because I think people want to live and work in a place that's living what values, their stated values, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's even more obvious today. It's more visible. And so thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was an absolute pleasure, and I hope to chat again soon.
Hey, stick around. I want to make a connection for you right after the program, but let's talk after we go off. Thank you guys for being with us today, spending some time with us here on Power Lunch Live. You can go to the website at powerlunch.live to check out our schedule. We'll see you tomorrow at 12 noon.